He called me old school in front of the entire production team, smirked like he'd just reinvented the wheel, then tried to explain my own quality control protocols back to me using a PowerPoint he'd downloaded from some consulting website. I didn't even correct him, just sat there drinking the same burnt coffee from the break room that I'd been drinking for 16 years and listened to Bradley Hoffman, fresh out of whatever MBA program Daddy's money bought him, call my safety checkpoints legacy friction. That was my first real clue. This wasn't about efficiency. It was about erasure. Name's Garrett Sullivan, 49 years old, and I've been keeping the production lines running at Pinnacle Manufacturing here in Dallas since Bradley was probably still figuring out how to tie his shoes. People think quiet means weak. They think experience means you're too set in your ways to adapt. That's why executives love hiring fresh MBAs until those MBAs remind them that theory and reality are two very different animals. Bradley didn't know the difference between ISO compliance and a sandwich order. He thought FDA regulations were suggestions, and yet somehow this walking case study in nepotism landed the title Director of Operational Excellence. No interviews, no shop floor experience, just a recycled consultant voice and a last name that made HR nod like bobbleheads. Before Bradley showed up, my days were predictable in the best possible way. I'd built that predictability over 16 years, one system at a time. Started here in 2007 as an independent consultant when Pinnacle was still recovering from their merger with Henderson Industries. They needed someone to integrate two completely different manufacturing systems, and I was the guy who knew both platforms inside and out. Back then, William Hoffman was just the VP of Operations, hungry to prove himself to the board. He'd walk the floor every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, checking on overnight production numbers. We'd developed a good working relationship. He respected my technical knowledge. I respected his business sense. When they offered me a full-time position in 2008, it felt like joining a family business where competence still mattered. I'd trained every systems engineer they'd hired over the years, helped 3 different plant managers navigate their first FDA audits without a single violation. Even taught William's previous golden boy, his nephew Jeremy, enough about SAP integration that Jeremy actually became decent at his job before transferring to the corporate office in Houston. Quality control systems humming, production targets consistently met, 0 regulatory violations for 8 straight years. The FDA inspector who came through in 2019 actually complimented our documentation trail. Said it was some of the cleanest record-keeping she'd seen in manufacturing. That wasn't luck. That was 16 years of building systems that didn't just work, they worked reliably. But Bradley wanted to make his mark fast. He'd been here exactly 11 days when he called his first efficiency review meeting. Walked into conference room B with a stack of printed charts and a confidence that could power the whole building. His presentation had 47 slides. I counted. "What we're looking at here," he said, clicking through bar charts he'd clearly copied from some McKinsey report, "is operational bloat disguised as quality assurance. We're spending too much time on redundant checkpoints that slow down our throughput without adding measurable value." He actually used the phrase measurable value 12 times in 30 minutes, like he'd just discovered the concept. The first system he targeted was my dual signature protocol for vendor modifications. Anytime we changed suppliers or modified existing vendor specifications, 2 different people had to sign off, one from procurement, one from quality assurance. It had been in place since 2009, after we got burned by a supplier who switched to cheaper materials without telling us and cost us $67,000 in rejected product. "This creates unnecessary friction in our vendor relationships," Bradley explained to the room of 8 people, most of whom had been here longer than he'd been out of college. "We need to streamline decision-making and eliminate bottlenecks that prevent us from being agile in a competitive marketplace." I raised my hand. "Bradley, that protocol has caught 3 major supplier issues in the past 18 months. Without it, we would have had FDA compliance problems and potentially contaminated product reaching customers." He smiled that condescending smile that every experienced professional learns to recognize. "Garrett, I appreciate your concern for quality, but we need to balance quality with efficiency. The data shows that 97% of vendor modifications go through without issues. We're designing our entire process around the 3% exception cases. Those 3% exception cases represent about $150,000 in potential losses per incident," I replied, "plus regulatory violations that could shut us down for weeks. That's exactly the kind of fear-based thinking that keeps organizations stuck in the past, he said, clicking to his next slide. We need to embrace calculated risks and trust our vendor partners. Trust our vendor partners. This from someone who'd probably never met a vendor, never walked a production line during a quality crisis, never had to explain to the FDA why contaminated product made it past our safeguards. But I didn't argue, just nodded and took notes. Because arguing with someone like Bradley in a public meeting is like wrestling with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. The meeting ended with Bradley's efficiency initiative approved by William Hoffman himself. 5 signatures on the approval form, including mine, because sometimes you have to pick your battles carefully. That afternoon, I started a new file on my computer. Not a complaint file or a documentation trail, just a simple spreadsheet tracking every change Bradley implemented with columns for predicted impact and actual results. I had a feeling I was going to need it. By the way, if you're still here, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It means more than you think. Most people watch without subscribing, but this one's going to be different. This is the one they'll remember. Bradley's second week started with what he called a comprehensive process audit. He'd scheduled individual meetings with every department head, armed with a tablet full of efficiency metrics and the kind of corporate buzzwords that make experienced professionals want to hide in supply closets. I was his 3 p.m. appointment on Tuesday. He'd moved into the corner office that used to belong to Janet Rodriguez, our old quality director before she retired last month. The walls were already covered with his printed charts and a whiteboard full of process flow diagrams that looked like someone had sneezed acronyms. "Garrett, thanks for coming," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "I've been reviewing your systems architecture, and I have some thoughts on optimization opportunities." I sat down in the chair across from his desk and waited. In 16 years, I'd learned that when someone says they have thoughts on optimization, what they really mean is they're about to break something that works. "Your vendor integration platform," he continued, finally making eye contact. "It's generating a lot of approval delays. I'm seeing average processing times of 3.2 days for new vendor onboarding. Industry standard is 1.8 days. Those 3.2 days include background verification, insurance confirmation, and compliance review," I explained. "Last year, that extra time caught 2 vendors with falsified insurance documents and 1 with outstanding EPA violations. Without proper vetting, we could have inherited their liability." Bradley waved his hand like he was swatting away an annoying fly. "But we're also losing competitive vendor bids because our approval process is too slow. I've run the numbers. If we streamline to industry standard, we could save approximately $23,000 annually in procurement costs." I leaned forward. "Bradley, 1 EPA violation fine starts at $45,000. 1 insurance claim from an unverified vendor could cost us $200,000. That extra day and a half of review has saved us more money than you'll save in a decade of faster approvals. That's risk-averse thinking," he said, making a note on his tablet. "We can't build our entire operation around worst-case scenarios. We build our operation around realistic scenarios, like the vendor who submitted fake EPA clearance documents last March. My verification process caught it. Without that check, we would have had federal regulators breathing down our necks. 1 isolated incident, 3 incidents last year alone. But they're not incidents when you catch them before they become problems." He looked at me like I'd just insisted the earth was flat. "Garrett, I respect your experience, but experience without adaptation becomes stagnation. We need to evolve our processes to remain competitive." That's when he showed me his solution, a streamlined vendor approval system that eliminated what he called redundant verification steps. No dual signatures, no extended insurance review, no EPA compliance double-checking, just basic documentation review and approval within 24 hours. "This will position us as the vendor-friendly manufacturer in our sector," he said with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had to explain a compliance violation to federal investigators. I scheduled a follow-up meeting to review the implementation plan. Then I went back to my desk and opened my tracking spreadsheet. New entry: vendor approval streamlining, predicted impact, increased compliance risk, potential regulatory violations, implementation date, pending. The following Monday, Bradley announced his vendor streamlining initiative in an email to all department heads. The subject line was Embracing Operational Excellence Through Strategic Process Evolution. I'm not making that up. The system went live on Wednesday. By Friday, we'd approved 3 new vendors in record time. Bradley sent another email celebrating our paradigm shift toward efficiency-driven excellence. The following Tuesday, I got a call from our insurance broker. One of those fast-approved vendors had let their liability coverage lapse 2 months ago. They'd submitted outdated documents, and without our standard verification process, no one had called to confirm current coverage. The vendor was currently operating $50,000 worth of equipment on our production floor with 0 insurance. I forwarded the insurance broker's email to Bradley with a simple message: FYI, potential liability exposure from vendor number 2. His response came back 3 hours later. Thanks for flagging. Let's discuss solutions rather than dwelling on problems. Solutions. As if the solution wasn't the verification process he'd just eliminated. But it got worse. The second fast-approved vendor had submitted EPA clearance documents that looked legitimate until our environmental compliance officer decided to make a routine verification call. Turns out the clearance number was real, but it belonged to a different company with a similar name. Our new vendor had essentially committed federal document fraud to speed up their approval. I sent Bradley another email. Vendor number 2 EPA documentation appears falsified. Recommend immediate suspension pending investigation. His response: let's not jump to conclusions. Schedule a meeting with vendor to clarify documentation discrepancies. Clarify documentation discrepancies. Like you clarify whether someone robbed a bank by asking them politely if they happened to borrow some money from the vault. I printed both emails and added them to a growing folder on my desk. Then I did something I'd never done in 16 years at Pinnacle Manufacturing. I sent a formal risk assessment memo to William Hoffman, copying the legal department and our corporate insurance liaison. The memo was 2 pages long and professionally understated. It outlined the potential liability exposure from streamlined vendor approval processes and recommended immediate review of recent vendor approvals. I didn't mention Bradley by name, didn't need to. The timeline made it obvious whose initiative had created the problems. William's response came the next morning, not an email, a phone call. Garrett, I got your memo. These vendor issues, are they related to Bradley's efficiency improvements? The timeline suggests a correlation, I said carefully. The problems emerged after we modified our verification protocols. Have you discussed this with Bradley directly? I've flagged both issues via email. He's indicated preference for vendor meetings over suspension pending investigation. Silence on the other end. Then, let me look into this. In the meantime, don't send any more memos without talking to me first. That afternoon, Bradley stopped by my desk. No appointment, no email heads up, just appeared next to my cubicle like a corporate ghost. Garrett, I understand you have concerns about our vendor process improvements. I appreciate your diligence, but I need you to understand something. We're trying to modernize our operations here. Change can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. I looked up from my screen. Bradley, we have 2 vendors with serious compliance issues that our old process would have caught. And we also have faster vendor onboarding that's improving our competitive positioning. We can't let isolated incidents paralyze our progress. These aren't isolated incidents. They're predictable outcomes of insufficient verification. That's where we disagree, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I think these are growing pains as we transition to a more efficient model. What I need from you is support for the transition, not constant pushback on every improvement initiative. I nodded slowly. Understood. But what I understood wasn't what he thought I understood. The following week, things escalated beyond vendor approval issues. Bradley had moved on to what he called production efficiency optimization. Translation: he wanted to eliminate what he saw as unnecessary quality checkpoints in our manufacturing process. Our production line had 7 quality control stations: raw material inspection, pre-assembly verification, mid-process quality check, final assembly inspection, packaging verification, shipping documentation review, and batch record completion. Each station had been added for a specific reason, usually after we'd learned an expensive lesson about what happens when you skip important steps. Bradley's efficiency analysis showed that eliminating 3 of those checkpoints would increase throughput by 12% and reduce labor costs by approximately $180,000 annually. His presentation to the management team was 23 slides of charts and graphs proving that our quality processes were statistically excessive. I wasn't in that meeting. Found out about it when Janet Martinez from HR forwarded me the implementation timeline. We had 2 weeks to transition to streamlined quality protocols and train staff on the new procedures. The 3 checkpoints Bradley wanted eliminated were mid-process quality check, packaging verification, and shipping documentation review. On paper, they looked redundant. In reality, they were the difference between shipping good product and shipping expensive mistakes. The mid-process quality check had caught a temperature control malfunction last year that would have ruined $45,000 worth of product if it had continued to final assembly. The packaging verification had identified mislabeled products 6 times in the past 18 months, preventing customer complaints and potential recalls. The shipping documentation review had caught invoicing errors that would have cost us $23,000 in undercharges to customers who probably wouldn't have volunteered to pay the difference. I requested a meeting with Bradley to discuss the implementation plan. He fit me into his schedule on Thursday afternoon, between his strategic planning session and his operational excellence review. "Garrett, I'm glad you're taking initiative on this transition," he said as I sat down. "Your buy-in is important for team morale during process changes. Bradley, I'm concerned about eliminating the mid-process quality check. That station has prevented significant product loss multiple times. I've reviewed the data. The mid-process check catches issues in approximately 2.3% of production runs. We're building our entire process around statistical outliers. Those 2.3% represent about $200,000 in potential losses annually. The cost of the quality check is about $35,000 per year in labor. We're getting 6-to-1 return on investment." He pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. "But if we eliminate the check and accept the occasional loss, we still come out ahead due to increased throughput. The math is simple. The math changes when the FDA gets involved. If we ship defective product that reaches customers, we're looking at recalls, investigations, and potential facility shutdowns. Those costs aren't in your spreadsheet. Garrett, this is exactly the risk-averse thinking that prevents organizations from optimizing their operations. We can't design our entire system around worst-case scenarios that may never happen. They're not worst-case scenarios. They're scenarios that have already happened. That's why these checkpoints exist. Based on historical data that may not reflect our current capabilities," he said, closing his laptop with the finality of someone ending a discussion. "We need to trust our improved processes and vendor partnerships." I left that meeting and did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I called our FDA liaison, Maria Santos, someone I'd worked with through 4 different compliance audits over the years. "Maria, hypothetical question. If a manufacturing facility eliminated mid-process quality checkpoints and shipping verification procedures, how would that affect their compliance status?" "Depends on what they're manufacturing," she said. "For medical devices or food-grade products, those checkpoints are often required for audit trail documentation. Eliminating them could trigger a compliance review. And if defective product reached customers due to eliminated checkpoints, that's potential recall territory. Depending on severity, could result in facility inspection, production shutdown, or administrative penalties." "Why are you asking?" "Just staying informed about regulatory requirements." "Garrett, in 8 years of working with you, you've never asked hypothetical compliance questions. Is there something I should know about?" I paused, weighing my options. "There are proposed process changes I'm concerned about. Nothing implemented yet. If you want to run specific procedures by me for compliance review, I'm happy to provide guidance. Better to catch potential issues before implementation." That conversation gave me exactly what I needed. I sent Bradley an email outlining potential FDA compliance concerns with eliminating the 3 quality checkpoints, offering to arrange a consultation with our regulatory liaison to review the changes before implementation. His response came back in 15 minutes. "Thanks for your input. We'll proceed with the implementation as planned. Please focus on training staff for the transition rather than identifying potential obstacles." I printed that email and added it to my growing folder. The next morning, William Hoffman called me into his office. Not a meeting request, not a scheduled appointment. His assistant called and said, "Mr. Hoffman would like to see you in his office immediately." I walked into that corner office knowing something had shifted. William was sitting behind his desk with a printout of my email exchange with Bradley spread in front of him. His expression wasn't angry exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. "Garrett, Bradley tells me you're creating resistance to his efficiency initiatives. He says you're undermining his authority and spreading fear about changes that could significantly improve our operations." I sat down in the chair across from his desk. "I've raised legitimate compliance concerns through proper channels. By contacting the FDA behind his back, I consulted with our FDA liaison about regulatory requirements. That's standard due diligence. Without informing Bradley that you were questioning his decisions with federal regulators, I informed Bradley about potential compliance issues via email. He indicated preference for proceeding without regulatory consultation." William leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a problem he needed to solve. "Garrett, you've been here 16 years. You're a valued employee. But Bradley is implementing necessary changes to keep us competitive. I need to know you're going to support his initiatives, not constantly look for reasons why they won't work. I support initiatives that don't create regulatory risks or compromise product quality. That's not what I asked." His voice had taken on that executive tone that meant the conversation was about to become much less collaborative. "I asked if you're going to support Bradley's leadership. Yes or no?" I looked at him for a long moment, this man I'd worked with for 16 years, this man who used to walk the production floor every morning and actually listen when I explained why certain procedures mattered. I support procedures that protect the company from regulatory violations and quality failures. That's not an answer to my question. It's the only answer I can give. He nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Then we have a problem." The all-hands meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at 10 a.m. Conference Room A, the big one with the projector and the long table that seated 25 people. When I walked in, every chair was filled except one at the far end, my usual spot. William stood at the head of the table with Bradley beside him, both of them wearing the kind of serious expressions that meant someone was about to get publicly executed. The agenda had one item: operational alignment and team expectations. "Thank you all for being here," William began, his voice carrying that executive authority tone. "We're gathered to address some concerns about our recent process improvements and to clarify expectations for supporting leadership initiatives." He gestured toward Bradley. "My son has been implementing critical efficiency improvements that will position us for continued growth and competitiveness. These changes represent the future of our operations." I could feel eyes turning toward me. Word travels fast in a manufacturing facility, and everyone knew about my escalations over vendor approvals and quality checkpoints. "However," William continued, "change can be challenging. Some team members may struggle to adapt to new methodologies, particularly those who've become comfortable with legacy processes." Legacy processes. There it was. After 16 years of building systems that worked, I was now officially the guy clinging to outdated methods. "Effective leadership requires team alignment," William said, his gaze settling directly on me. "When team members consistently question decisions, create resistance to change, or go around established authority to raise concerns with external parties, it undermines our operational effectiveness." The room was dead silent. You could hear the ventilation system cycling on. "Garrett," William said, and every head in the room turned to look at me. "You've been with us for 16 years. Your technical knowledge is valuable, but your recent actions suggest a fundamental disagreement with our leadership direction." I kept my expression neutral, hands folded in front of me. Bradley has shown remarkable initiative in identifying improvement opportunities. His background and fresh perspective are exactly what we need to modernize our operations. What we don't need is resistance disguised as concern. Bradley sat perfectly still, but I could see the slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "So, I'm going to be very clear about expectations going forward," William continued. "We need team players who support our leadership initiatives. We need people willing to embrace change rather than constantly identifying reasons why improvements won't work." He paused, letting that sink in. "Garrett, I need you to publicly acknowledge Bradley's leadership and commit to supporting his initiatives without reservation. I need you to apologize for going around his authority and creating friction during this transition period." 24 pairs of eyes stared at me. The silence stretched out like a wire about to snap. Furthermore, William added, "You're off operational projects until you're willing to demonstrate that commitment publicly." I looked around the room at faces I'd worked with for years. Janet Rodriguez, who I'd helped train on quality systems. Mike Rodriguez from procurement, who'd relied on my vendor verification process dozens of times. Sarah Williams from production, who knew exactly why those quality checkpoints mattered. None of them met my eyes. I unmuted myself from the mental static and said, "I understand." "Do you?" William pressed. "Because understanding and agreeing are different things. I need to know you're going to support Bradley's leadership going forward." I stood up slowly, pushed my chair back from the table, and looked directly at William Hoffman. "I understand completely." Then I walked out of that conference room, down the hallway, past the production floor I'd helped optimize for 16 years, past the break room where I'd drunk thousands of cups of terrible coffee, and straight to my desk. That's where I did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a manila folder I'd kept there since 2007. Inside was a copy of my original consulting contract, the one from before I became a full-time employee, before all the acquisitions and restructuring. Section 12, subsection D, was highlighted in yellow. Consultant retains ownership rights to proprietary system modifications and integration protocols developed independently during contract period. In the event of project termination without cause, consultant maintains exclusive licensing authority for derivative works. I'd insisted on that clause back when I didn't trust corporate promises. Good thing, because corporate promises turned out to be exactly as reliable as I'd expected. I spent the weekend at home, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, systematically documenting every system I'd built or significantly modified over 16 years. The vendor integration platform, the quality control monitoring system, the production line tracking software, the FDA compliance documentation generator, the automated reporting dashboard that Bradley loved showing to visitors. All of it tied to licensing agreements with Ridgepoint Solutions, my original consulting company that had never been officially dissolved. Monday morning, I didn't go to the office. I logged into the administrative back-end of our systems remotely and changed exactly one parameter in each critical system: licensing status from active to pending renewal. The first system to hiccup was the production monitoring dashboard, just a soft error message. License verification failed. Contact Ridgepoint Solutions for renewal authorization. By Tuesday afternoon, half their operational systems were running in degraded mode. Quality control reports were backing up. Vendor approvals were stuck in processing. The investor dashboard Bradley used for quarterly presentations was displaying nothing but error messages. My phone rang Wednesday morning. Unknown number, Dallas area code. "Garrett, this is William Hoffman. We need to talk." His voice had lost all that executive confidence. Now he sounded like someone whose house was on fire and he couldn't find the extinguisher. "I'm listening," I said, sitting in my kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee that actually tasted good for once. "There seems to be some kind of system malfunction. It says everything's tied to some consulting company you used to run. Legal says there's a contract clause from 2007 that's still active." I let the silence stretch out for about 10 seconds. "William, I tried to explain the importance of these systems through proper channels. Multiple times." "Yes, but surely we can work something out. You've been part of our family for 16 years. I was family until your son decided I was legacy friction. Now I'm just an independent contractor whose licensing needs to be renewed. What would it take to get everything back online? A new consulting contract with Ridgepoint Solutions. Emergency recovery rates are $350 per hour. Ongoing support is $6,500 monthly. 6-month minimum commitment." I could hear him calculating. Emergency recovery would take about 40 hours. The monthly retainer was double my old take-home pay. But without those systems, they were hemorrhaging money and facing potential regulatory violations. And Bradley? Bradley can keep his director title and his efficiency initiatives. But any changes to core systems come through me first, in writing. With proper technical review. I need to discuss this with legal. "Take your time, William. The systems stay offline until we have a signed agreement." He called back that afternoon. "Contract approved." I never went back to that cubicle. Now when I walk into Pinnacle Manufacturing, it's through the front entrance as Ridgepoint Solutions, consulting partner, not through the employee entrance with a badge and a time clock. Bradley still works there, still has his title. But now every efficiency improvement gets routed through me for technical review. Turns out when you actually have to justify your decisions to someone who understands the systems, most improvements aren't quite so necessary. Some people call it revenge. I call it knowing your worth and making sure everyone else knows it too.